Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Return to Work Customer Webinar. As a reminder, all calls are in listen-only mode. We will have a designated Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, and we encourage you to submit your questions at any time by typing the question in the questions section of the GoToWebinar console. We recommend that you expand the viewing window to full screen mode by using the Zoom dropdown in the upper portion of your screen. This session will be recorded and made available to participants after the call. Now I'd like to introduce Claudia Dent, Senior Vice President of Product Marketing. Go ahead, Claudia.
Thank you, Carrie. I really appreciate the introduction. And I am very happy to be here today to take you through how we can help you and your employees get back to work. And in some ways, many of us have already been working through this entire event, but now it's time to maybe even return to an actual facility or building, etc. And so from an Everbridge perspective, we provide a number of different solutions which can help us all go back to work. A lot of it is around understanding the threat landscape, not only for coronavirus, but don't forget, nature is not going to stop hurricanes or cyclones, or protesters certainly aren't stopping because of the pandemic. We've got, a landscape of protesters and, some civil unrest, which is, also a consideration in keeping people safe. We also have many solutions around protecting people. That's really the core of our capabilities. And we also, of course, enable you to automate the recovery of your operations with products like crisis management, etc. But really the purpose of today's webinar is to focus on the protecting your people and understanding how capabilities like contact tracing can help return to work efforts. So today we're going to drill into number one, what is contact tracing? How we can help you automate an end-to-end workflow that includes contact tracing, because it's not just about that one technology, it's about a broader consideration of how to get people, back to work, back to school, whatever that situation is. And also a deep dive into some of the capabilities so you can understand how you can leverage different parts of the Everbridge suite to drive that return to work workflow for your specific situations. So let's talk about what the return to work capabilities that we are offering. So everything that we're offering today and talking about today is part of Safety Connection Pro. So there will be no additional charge for these capabilities if you are Safety Connection Pro customers. And if anything, we want to help you get jump started using some of these capabilities. And we're really looking forward to an ongoing relationship around helping you leverage these kinds of capabilities. So when we think about the solution, it involves, of course, the Everbridge platform and all the things that come with that, the Safety Connection product, and also our mobile application, which helps facilitate the workflow in a number of different ways. And we're going to drill into each of these areas in more detail. But the key new capabilities are location-based contact tracing, proximity-based contact tracing, an Everbridge mobile application that now has very configurable safety buttons, which can be used for return to work. And also, we're introducing some new end-to-end return to work automation, which enables some of the things around wellness checking, etc., to be much more automated, so you can have a process that involves, an understanding of who's eligible to enter the workplace or the campus or whatever the facility is on a regular basis. So from an Everbridge perspective, when we think about contact tracing, we don't just think about that one technology, we think about an entire end-to-end process. The first is around keeping people safe, before they even enter the building or facility or campus, by doing things like wellness checks. And then once someone does identify as positive, how do you expedite and make sure that you minimize as many potential exposures as possible? And that's where the contact tracing technology comes into play. And then finally, once you know that a number of people have been potentially exposed, how do you manage that follow-up process with them? How do you ensure that they get, the right care that they need, and that, they are returned back into circulation, whether it's back to campus or back to the facility, et cetera, in a way that is, continues to protect the rest of your workforce. So that's really the end-to-end contact tracing workflow and perspective, and we're going to drill into each of these. First, I do want to talk specifically about contact tracing because there's a lot of questions about what contact tracing is, how does it work, and how does Everbridge actually help. So there are actually 3 different ways in which you can do contact tracing. First, there's what's considered proximity-based contact tracing, and that's where you leverage your mobile phones and you leverage the Bluetooth low energy solution so that you can actually understand who you come in proximity with that may be infected. Now, in this situation, you don't understand the location specifically, but you do understand if you've ever been in contact with a person that later on reports as positive. There are frameworks out there like the Google Apple framework that's being leveraged for state and local governments. And there's also a number of proprietary frameworks of which Everbridge is leveraging for our own proximity-based tracing. And the reason we're doing that is because it provides us a level of flexibility and configurability so that you as an organization can decide how you want to leverage that technology. And we're going to drill into that in more detail. So the next kind of contact tracing is location-based contact tracing. And that enables you to leverage sources of location data that you already have today. So with proximity-based tracing, people must download a mobile application. It does require an opt-in. With location-based tracing, you can leverage existing location sources that you have. For example, Wi-Fi hotspots. Who was in the same Wi-Fi hotspot as someone who tested positive? Other things like badge access control, your mobile GPS location, schedules, calendars. All of those things give insight into who might have been potentially exposed when someone reports as positive. And in this situation, it does give a specific location of where that actually occurred. And then finally, there's manual contact tracing, which is very time consuming. It doesn't involve those other technologies. It's primarily interview based and case management based. Now, there's some aspect of case management in anything that you do around contact tracing, but you want to leverage other automation in terms of being able to manage and follow up with people in a consistent way that provides things like audit trails, et cetera, so that you can demonstrate that when there was a group of people that were potentially exposed, you took the right actions to make sure that they were well taken care of. So in essence, Everbridge delivers proximity-based tracing. You'll see when that's coming, location-based tracing, and we also facilitate the full life cycle of contact tracing, including some of the follow-up, et cetera. So let's talk about first location-based contact tracing. In many ways, the Safety Connection product was made for this kind of application because of the way in which we manage dynamic locations. But the one capability that we have to add to complete that is the notion of understanding location history. So that is what we have added to the Everbridge Safety Connection product, is the ability for you to understand location history so that when someone does surface as being positive, you can look back in time and correlate who intercepted and interacted with that particular person based on as many dynamic locations or expected locations that you have access to. Now, one of the things from an Everbridge perspective that we've always tried to encourage people was to leverage as many location sources as possible for emergencies, right? Understanding where people are in the event of something like a terrorist attack or an active shooter. In some ways, the more location points you have, the more information, the more sure that you're going to actually be able to reach that person. And in some ways, for contact tracing, the same is true. The more information points you have on someone's location, the richer data you will have on whether someone is potentially exposed. So when we look at the contact profile for Diane Wilkinson here, we can actually run a location history if she unfortunately happens to self-report that she's actually positive. So once we know Diane is positive, we run a location history. You can specify the date range around that location history. You run the scan, it's a push button scan, and it will tell you how many contacts were in the same location at the same time, or after, or actually before. And then you decide how you actually want to reach out to these exposed people. And this depends upon your workflow and what's most important for your organization. So for example, you can launch custom messages to different contact categories if you choose to. You can download those impacted people so that you can decide how you want to reach out to people. You may want to do a survey and get more information, but it's really up to you to decide the workflow for your particular organization. We will provide you with some out-of-the-box templates to get started, but the idea here is, based on the profile of your organization, the access to location information that you have, you may decide how you want to automate that notification process to the people who may have been potentially exposed to Diane Wilkinson when she self-reports as positive. So that's really the essence of location-based contact tracing. And notice that the report is very specific around not only the location, but the timestamp and the source of that location. So that's an important piece of information as well. What was that source? You may decide that for certain badge access locations that's casting too wide of a net. You may decide that you want to leverage some sources more than others, etc. So we provide you with that flexibility to understand that from a location perspective. And the benefit of contact tracing from a location-based contact tracing is that no one has to necessarily download any kind of mobile app. It's data that you have available in your organization today, particularly like Wi-Fi hotspot, etc. That's incredibly valuable information that is something that can be leveraged readily without waiting for opt-ins. And again, using a combination of data sources is always the best approach if your organization can do that. So the next capability around contact tracing is proximity. And this is the capability that you've seen a lot of press on because of the Apple Google framework, etc. This capability is coming in July. We're working on it now. We are working incredibly quickly to get these capabilities to you as quickly as possible. But I do want to spend some time on digging in how proximity contact tracing actually works. So, Alice downloads the Everbridge mobile application. So does Jeff. They both have the application. They both enable the Bluetooth proximity feature. And as they are, interacting day to day, they're actually generating anonymous keys that are being used to exchange whenever they come in close contact with one another. So for example, if there is an exposure event, if Alice happens to come in contact, with Jeff, they've exchanged keys. If she becomes positive and self-reports that she's positive, actually, and by the way, there's no PII exchanged here. Jeff will be automatically notified that he has been exposed to COVID-19. And it's really around device-to-device exposure, and we protect the PII of both parties, Alice and Jeff. There are also some configuration options that we'll be offering as well around the proximity-based contact tracing. So for example, there are two options. You may want to know who the self-reporter is. You may want to actually know who Alice is in your organization, so you can reach out to Alice and make sure that she gets additional help. And you also, want to reach out to the internal team members as well. You may also want to keep Alice anonymous based on the needs of your specific organization. And in that way, you cannot reach out to Alice. You don't know who Alice is, but you can reach out to the various internal team members or parts of that team that have been exposed, so potentially exposed, right, to give them further direction on, they need to quarantine, etc. There's also the ability to configure, around, again, who was actually exposed. So for example, you may decide that you actually know the self-reporter, but you don't have access to who was potentially exposed, that information is maintained as private. And the Everbridge administrator or the member of your contact tracing team cannot view and reach out to any of the employees or students, if it's a university campus, that have been exposed to Alice. So those are the settings that you can use for your specific situation and how you want to manage, potential exposures. And that's the essence of the Everbridge contact tracing from a proximity perspective. And that will be available in the July timeframe. So now that we've drilled into those technologies, I'd like to take a step back and talk about the workflow in general around how to decide who enters a facility, who enters a building, who you want to enter different, buildings on a campus, etc. It's really all about understanding who's eligible and protecting those people, and also understanding who's not eligible and being able to automate a workflow around those two containers, so to speak. So for the eligible people, that's not just around their COVID risk, but it's also around the needs of the organization. So from an Everbridge perspective, within your contact record, you may decide that people with certain roles are eligible to enter because they have essential jobs and they need to be at the facility. Whereas other people can work more comfortably from home and can achieve what they need to achieve working remotely. So perhaps they're not eligible. And then you combine that with the risk status from a COVID-19 perspective. And then for those who are not eligible, that could include the needs of the organization. For example, people who don't really, need to be on campus, versus, and then including those who are of high risk around COVID-19 and their status. Did they test positive? Do they, are they showing symptoms? Do they have a high temperature, etc.? Now and then we also want to make sure that those people who are on the not eligible list because of their COVID risk status, that we return them to health quickly and return them back to that eligible list. We also have to understand that in an instant, someone can change status. At any point in time, someone who has not been at risk for COVID all of a sudden has an exposure event or they've tested positive. So in an instant, someone's status can change. And the whole notion is, how do we contain that as quickly as possible from a workflow perspective? So the first thing around keeping people safe is that continual validation of eligibility. And that can happen with things like daily wellness checks and also validation once someone is at the facility. So let's take a look at a daily wellness check. So all of those who are eligible will receive a wellness check from Everbridge. Behind the scenes, that's simply a polling notification that the employee or student, whoever, enters their status. Based on their responses, they can receive a message back that says they are approved to enter the facility. Now, at this point in time, they may also have answered in such a way that they are not approved. So they are immediately put on the not eligible list. So this can be used for other purposes in the sense that you can now control things like badge access and make sure that people who are on the not eligible list are not valid to enter a specific facility. From an Everbridge perspective, the other thing we've added is an automation between how people respond to that wellness check and automating that approval stamp and the stamp that says they are not able to enter a particular facility or office or building. So that piece, as part of our Safety Connection Pro contact tracing end-to-end workflow, is now completely automated. You don't have to, if you want it to be, and I will talk in more detail around the options around that in a few slides. So once you're actually approved to enter the facility, once you reach the facility, many organizations are putting other validations in process, right? So for example, as people arrive at the facility, they have to have a temperature scan to see whether they're showing any symptoms of elevated temperature. If their temperature is okay, they're approved to enter. If it's not okay, again, we can automatically initiate an incident communication that tells that someone is not eligible to enter, and they are put on that not eligible list. So now we're very quickly maintaining who's eligible and who we need to take care of. And that's really the important thing here, is that continual validation, because what you want to do is keep people safe as much as possible before they even enter the building. So now what happens, once someone is not eligible, we want to manage their case and take care of them as best as possible. So there are things, that we can do from an automated communication perspective to do daily checks to ensure that they're quarantining. We can provide information on them to where to get, testing taken care of. We have secure chat, so you can actually reach out to someone and make sure that they're okay, do they have any concerns, etc. And when at the point in which they, we know they test negative, they've fulfilled their quarantine piece, they are then able to, re-enter the workforce, and they now become eligible. So we're completing that cycle. Now, what happens when someone self-reports that they've been tested positive? We now have a new button on the Safety Connection application for someone to self-report. And when that happens, you kick off a alert in the form of an incident behind the scenes to the contact tracing team. And that has all the benefits of an incident communication from Everbridge, where you can escalate that notification to the right people on the contact tracing team. And once they receive that, they can run that exposure scan. They run the exposure scan and they quickly notify the people who may have been exposed and get them quarantined as quickly as possible. When proximity tracing is available, you can also automatically notify those people that they have been exposed also, so that they can take action very quickly. And again, you have the option to use both location and proximity, either or both. And that is also configurable by you, whether you want that automatic notification to happen. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you decide to leverage this workflow. But we do give you a starting point in the out-of-the-box templates and workflow that we've automated. So everything that you see here, we've provided for you, out of the box as part of the contact tracing solution. Now, the key thing is once somebody self-reports, the whole goal is for you to accelerate that speed of containment as much as possible, in a way that's is prudent for your organization as well. You want to notify the contact tracing team, the HR team. You want to understand that potential exposure, notify impacted persons, and ensure that people are quarantined as quickly as possible. And that's all about speed of containment. So let's dig into some of the other areas in more detail around this end-to-end contact tracing. We looked at the overall workflow. We talked about things like wellness checks. Let's take a little look under the hood, because I know many of you are Everbridge customers out there, so you understand the technology that we have to some degree, and I'm sure you have some questions around how this all works. So let's talk about the wellness check or the daily attestation. And by the way, you can use any cycle you want. We call it a daily wellness check, but it's up to you how frequently and how often you want to do that. Leveraging the Everbridge platform, you can choose how often you want to do that. So the way this works is that behind the scenes there is a incident communications template that is configurable. Again, we give you the starting point, but there's some cool automation things here. You can actually automate the approval form, so that you can decide, do I want that to be automatically approved for people, or do I want to manually inspect who meets the qualifications to enter the facility, and do some manual inspection and then do an approval. So you have a way to make that choice, whether you want to auto approve entry into a building. There's also another key capability around the automation where you have what's called a facility threshold. So this is a situation where you have the ability to decide how many people should enter the building, and this can be based on purposes for social distancing. So you may decide that there's an occupancy threshold of 25 or 100 or whatever it is. You enter that number, and only the first N responders will be approved to enter the building or facility. So all of these capabilities are configurable. We give you this as a starting point. I think you can understand that there's a lot of other things that you can do here as well, leveraging rules. So you can combine this kind of thing with, not only eligibility from a COVID perspective, but also other attributes on the contact record as well, to have a more complete picture of, I need this many workers for, this particular set of functions, etc. So all of that is, easily configurable, leveraging the richness of the contact profile combined with the automation of the wellness check. So the other capability that's being introduced, it's actually introduced this evening in Safety Connection, is fully configurable buttons on the Everbridge mobile application. So you can configure any button you want, really, and they can model either a panic button, a location button, safe corridor, a phone call, or any kind of custom content. And you can actually add your own icons. So these icons can be, your logo, any kind of company, university, any icons that you want. And not only can you do things like, activate a panic button or provide some custom content, you can also activate, incident templates behind the scenes as well. And that's how we are able to achieve things like, the self-report for COVID-19, etc. But there's some other things that you can do with these configurable buttons as well that help keep people safe. For example, you can actually provide symptom checkers to your constituents, and you can model that after, where your constituents may be located. So if you want constituents in France to get a French version from the France authority, you can configure that based on groups, as well as, the CDC or NHS, etc. So this can be, again, configured however you want, and it would be automated based on, what group someone belongs to or what rule, and they get the symptom checker that they should. We're also upgrading the symptom checker in July so that it's actually more form-based, and not only is it, configurable from a form-based perspective, but based on how someone responds to that symptom checker, you can auto launch an incident. So if someone is taking the symptom checker and they happen to, report that they have a cough, they're fatigued, and they have shortness of breath, you may want to launch an incident that, makes sure that they make an appointment with the wellness center on campus, or that they quarantine. That's up to you and your specific workflow, etc. But again, this form-based capability provides you with some flexibility. And it's important to note that you'll be able to do other things with that form-based capability as well. The symptom checker is our starting point for leveraging that. You also might want to provide people with testing labs and where they're located based on their location. If you have relationships with some of the testing providers, or you want them to use specific testing labs, you can easily link to location information on testing labs as well. And again, you can point to who gets which lab providers based on someone's group identification, or based on their location, etc. And all of that's going to be, that's available today, actually. So that's all around keeping people safe. How do we keep people safe, before they even enter into the facility? Now, once people are, engaged in the workforce and they're working within your facilities or campuses, we have to give people a way to identify that they're positive. So We provide that today using a custom button, and someone selects that button, they successfully have reported their status, and behind the scenes, that's initiating an incident workflow to alert the contact tracing team, whoever you have designated as part of that team. And obviously there's access controls to that. We have to be very careful around who gets those notifications. The mobile application, again, is HIPAA compliant. So who's ever getting those notifications, they are encrypted in transit and at rest. That's a very important piece to mention here. And once they get that notification, they can respond, accordingly, conduct the contact tracing, etc. In July, we're going to be upgrading the self-report to a configurable form. So you'll be able to ask more questions around, when did they test positive? Maybe some information about did they travel, just a few other things that you might want to know. That is, available for you as well, coming in the July upgrade timeframe. So, and finally, how do we help manage follow-up in the event that you have a number of people that may have been potentially exposed? So this again, once you've alerted that COVID team, that contact tracing team or the HR team, who's ever responsible in your organization, you can automate, or you can have them, decide when they want to reach out. So that's totally up to you how you want to conduct that workflow. But we do have things like secure chat, which again is HIPAA compliant. It was designed specifically for healthcare facilities. So you have the ability to reach out to people and make sure that, hey, we know you've been potentially exposed. We want to make you ensure that you are well taken care of. Whatever kind of questions that they may have, they may feel scared. This gives you the ability to reach out to them and have a conversation, in conjunction with giving them automated notifications around specific actions you want them to take, daily wellness checks, etc. So it enables you to provide the right balance around getting a notification to them really quickly, but also having the opportunity to reach out on a more personal basis. And all of this, again, because it's part of an incident communications workflow, is managed under one umbrella, so you can understand and have a history of the conversations and the audit trail of what's transpired between you and that particular person. Those are also available to you so that you can make sure that you have a history of that person's case, etc. So let's just take a step back. We talked about a lot of capabilities, and I want to put in one place what's available when, so that you have an understanding of how we're rolling this out in Safety Connection Pro. I will tell you that the Everbridge team is working around the clock to deliver these capabilities to you. We're fortunate that we have a great platform to start with. So there are many things that are available today to get you started. The first is that workflow automation around the wellness check with things like auto, response approvals and thresholds, the ability to configure Safety Connection buttons so that people can self-report. You can provide symptom checkers, access to testing labs. And also we have the follow-up leveraging our HIPAA compliant secure chat. That is all available today. Some of that is being rolled out literally tonight in our 20.0 release. Those are the capabilities for today. In a week or two, we're delivering the location-based contact tracing that enables you to leverage Safety Connection dynamic locations. It gives you that push button contact tracing scan. You can automatically launch notifications, run reports, etc., based on the results of that scan. So that's coming imminently. And then in the July timeframe, we're introducing the proximity-based contact tracing, and it includes, some, the self-reporter being anonymous and enables potentially exposed people to understand in a more automated fashion. You decide how you want to configure that. And we're also upgrading the self-report and the symptom checker to provide you with more form-based, more aesthetically pleasing type capabilities based on your particular needs, etc. So that's the roadmap for the Everbridge contact tracing. I want to just, again, emphasize that it's really an end-to-end process around keeping people safe, being able to identify a positive case, quickly identify exposures and contain them, and then really manage follow-up with those people who not only identified as positive, but also were potentially exposed. So that's the capabilities that we're offering. And, we really, we're ready to help you guys. We've got these out-of-the-box workflows and templates. Please engage your account managers, and we will continue to provide you with information. So this webinar recording will be available, and there will be a contact tracing data sheet available as well. But at this point, I do want to emphasize that these capabilities are part of Safety Connection Pro. They're an inherent part of our Everbridge platform, and we're here today to help you jumpstart those efforts, during this particular, trying time for all of us. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions, and I think Carrie is going to help facilitate, some of that process.
Great, thank you, Claudia. We've got a lot of really great questions here. If we don't get to all of them, we can certainly follow up offline. But just as a reminder, to ask a question, type the question in the questions panel in your GoToWebinar console, and I can read it aloud for you. First question is, does contact tracing require people to have the Everbridge app downloaded on their mobile phone?
The answer to that question is, if you use location-based contact tracing, it does not require anyone to download the Everbridge mobile application. You can leverage other location sources such as Wi-Fi hotspots, other kinds of location beacons, badge access control, calendar schedules, etc. Obviously, there are some benefits if you want something like the proximity tracing to leverage the mobile application, but we're providing as much flexibility as possible so you can really leverage many location and proximity sources to get the most accurate information around potential exposures.
Wonderful, thank you. When you're evaluating exposure, does it evaluate the time of exposure? Because time in contact is an issue.
Yes, it does. It timestamps in both cases the time of exposure, and only in location does it give you location.
Thank you. Next question, is the daily wellness check just a single polling question, or can it ask several different questions? So
it can ask several different questions, and based on the results, you would have to automate the workflow accordingly.
Okay, thank you. What would happen if someone accidentally pressed "I'm affected" when they're not? Can they reverse their mistake?
That's a great question. That's why we have certain safeguards in place, so that if you actually know who the self-reporter is, you can validate that before you start the contact tracing process. But in most situations, it's difficult to stop that process if you've fully automated it. But that's a great question. That's why we put that safeguard in.
Excellent, thank you. Then following up on the previous question about the daily wellness checks being a single polling question, allowing multiple questions, is that available in July or available now?
So that is available in July.
Okay, thank you. What are the current access control system integrations that you have today, and who are they?
Yeah, so we have, we pretty much integrate with any access control system. They all provide logs of who badges in, and we can take in any source. We have a very open platform from that perspective. So virtually anything is fine.
Thank you. Can someone report and expose contact without them doing it themselves?
So in that situation, you would have to have a hotline. Obviously, there are some, there's some tricky things there around HIPAA compliance, but from a technical perspective, yes, someone can call in and, let's say someone gets very sick, so they can't call in themselves. And so, their family member reaches out to HR and says, so-and-so is ill. The HR person at that point can start looking at the contact tracing process.
Thank you. Next question, do you expose an API to integrate with access control systems?
Yes.
Okay. Another question is, I'm especially curious about keeping lone workers safe in environments in which they cannot bring their phones, like for example, a laboratory.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So in like a laboratory, there are ways in which you can use things like beacons that provide some information. So you can use things like that. We also have the ability to integrate today with wristband from a location awareness perspective and a panic button perspective. So we're looking at taking wearables and extending them to things like proximity tracing, et cetera. So we'd have to understand a little bit more around that, that use case, but we'd be very happy to engage in a deeper discussion around that.
Thank you. What Everbridge mobile app is used?
So we have the Everbridge mobile application that is our unified app. So that enables you to combine not only the COVID capabilities, but other safety capabilities that you may want to provide to either your, either your students or your employees around things like panic, safe corridor, things of that nature. So the benefit of going with the Everbridge safety app and Everbridge safety connection is that you're investing in something that can be used not only during COVID-19, but for other safety situations as well. So once you get people using it for COVID, they'll start using it for other things as well. And you can control when you decide to, what you decide to automate, what you decide to offer, because those buttons, as you see, are all customizable and you decide who sees what also.
Perfect, thank you. Will we be able to force a daily wellness check if the system notices a member of the team in the office and has not completed the wellness check for the day?
Yes, so that's exactly one of the tenets of that workflow is that, first of all, let's imagine that somebody doesn't answer the wellness check. They would automatically be put on the not eligible to enter. And you can actually, leveraging badge access control systems, feed a list of people that cannot enter the facility. So when they go to badge in, they will not be able to badge in. Or you have someone at the door that's literally checking, do they have that approved stamp or not? And we also have customers that are using QR codes every day as another way to determine who's eligible to enter and who is not.
Thank you. Next is, I'd like to hear how various sizes and types of agencies approach this differently, and what considerations they think of when deciding how in-depth to approach this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and people are looking at a variety of different things. First of all, the issue of privacy is of utmost concern. So there are some, institutions, universities, et cetera, that are looking more for something that's very anonymous. And that's why we have the proximity tracing capability that we provide, an anonymous self-report, and obviously the people who are exposed are, never know who they were actually exposed to, and even the university itself is not, does not have to know who that person was. So that's one aspect, and so that's one thing is around privacy. On the other side of that are employers who want to know who's been exposed because of duty of care, and they want to be able to quickly contain the situation, put people in quarantine, make sure they get the right help, etc. So they would like to know, A, who self-reported and who was potentially exposed. So that's one consideration. And the other consideration is, what control do you have over people, for example, downloading a mobile application? So in some situations, you can make that a requirement. In others, you cannot. So you may want to leverage other data sources. Or we know it takes time for people to adopt something. How do you jumpstart getting data sooner rather than later if there's a potential exposure? So those are some of the things that that are considerations. We've been obviously having many conversations and working with a lot of different customers on how to roll these things out, and we'd be more than happy to look at your specific situation and engage in what some of the trade-offs would be.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have time for one more. How does this integrate with our current Everbridge subscription? What's the cost, and is it mobile only? It's talking about contact tracing.
Right, so location-based contact tracing does not require the mobile application. Proximity-based does require the mobile application. And the good news is that proximity-based will be included within the Everbridge mobile app, which is free of charge. All of the capabilities that I showed you today, the customizable buttons, the workflow, around self-reporting, etc. All of that is part of Safety Connection Pro, the location-based contact tracing, and for Safety Connection Pro, customers will be of no additional charge. So we're anxious to work with you and help our customers move to to the next level around returning to work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. Well, that's all the time that we have today for questions. Just as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and we will be sending out a copy of the recording via email in the next couple of days. Continue asking questions. Happy to answer those through your account manager. Otherwise, this concludes our Return to Work webinar. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at a future event. Take care.
Yeah, and I'd like to just say thank you as well for everyone who attended, and I hope that you are all well and that you stay safe during these times. Thank you so much.